Hello, my name is Jonathan Fernandez. I'm from Students for Liberty, Spain, and today I have the pleasure to be speaking with attorney Marc J. Victor, who is the president of the Attorneys Freedom Law Firm and the founder of the Live and Let Live movement. And to start, I would like you to tell us a little about yourself and what is the Live and Let Live movement.
Okay, well, thanks for having me on your show, Jonathan. It's a pleasure. Well, it's true. My name's Marc Victor. I am a criminal defense attorney in the United States, specifically Arizona. We have a firm in Arizona and in Honolulu, Hawaii as well. We have a national practice, so we represent people in other states as well across the nation, and all types of criminal cases. We also do civil rights cases, so we sue the government when we think the government gets out of control, which happens from time to time, more than we like. And so our firm is called the Attorneys for Freedom. Every lawyer at our law firm is a pro-freedom activist. That's one of the requirements for being a lawyer at our firm. I mean, the name's Attorneys for Freedom, so you have to be an attorney for freedom. And how do we measure that? Well, if somebody goes to the Live and Let Live website, which is liveandletlive.org, they'll encounter something there called the Live and Let Live Pledge. And if a person reads that and understands it and agrees with that, then okay, we accept that as being pro-freedom, if you will. So every lawyer who works at our law firm has to sign the Live and Let Live Pledge. So the Live and Let Live movement is something different from our law firm. Our law firm founded the Live and Let Live movement. This is a nonprofit known as a 501c3 organization in the United States, which means it's a nonprofit organization. And the stated goal of the Live and Let Live movement is to bring about global peace. So it's a big project. It's a project right now that hasn't even officially kicked off yet. It's scheduled to officially kick off in March of 2023. Right now, we're in a pre-launch phase. So we're sort of constructing chapters around the world. We have chapters already in many, many different countries. I don't think we have one in Spain yet, although there are many in Europe. Right now, there's chapters in Portugal, in Poland, in Italy. I think we'll have one very soon in France. There's one in the UK. Austria. I think we have a chapter there. If not already started, should be started very soon. And so many other places in the world. Probably Africa, as they call themselves, Team Africa, is already out in front. They think they will lead the world. There's about 10 different countries in Africa right now, very enthused about the Live and Let Live movement, and also Australia. So, we're expanding all the time. The movement is growing. The movement is fairly simple. If you agree with the phrase "Live and Let Live," you'll probably love the Live and Let Live movement, because the movement is really all about that phrase. And so, what does it mean to live and let live? Well, if it means anything, it means you shouldn't aggress against other people, right? If you're hitting other people over the head as an aggressor, then certainly you are not living in accordance with anything that could be described as live and let live. So the way we break this down, we like to say, just sort of in a shorthanded way, don't be an aggressor. What's an aggressor? Somebody who initiates force against another person or their property, somebody who engages in fraud, somebody who engages in coercion. And maybe the last category here is a little tricky, but somebody who does something to create what we call a substantial risk of harm to another person. So you put somebody in harm's way, you create a dangerous condition or something like that, that another person is at risk or their property is at risk of suffering harm. So if you can refrain from doing that, then you should be left alone. Another way to say this is that all laws should be calibrated around this live and let live principle, what we call the 3LP, live and let live principle, 3LP. And so all the laws ought to be calibrated around the 3LP. If we can get to that, then we would get a free society. And if this, of course, was extended around the world, which I think is our society today, then we'd get a free world. But we're a peace movement. And so peace requires something more than just freedom, merely refraining from being an aggressor. Peace requires some values and ethics. And so these are things that, of course, people are free to ignore, but we call them aspirational values. They're things we're pushing as aspirational. So we would oppose incorporating these into the law, but we very strongly encourage people to adopt these values. And so these are the values that get us to a civilized society, things like open-mindedness and tolerance and voluntary kindness, acting civilized towards other people, building high levels of trust with other human beings, being interested and committed to the truth of the matter and facts. And overall, we like to describe this as having a commitment to optimizing human happiness while decreasing human suffering. So these are aspirational in nature. This separates us from every other freedom movement, and also separates us from movements that have these same values but want to incorporate them into the law. These are ethical matters, not legal matters. And so we think ethical issues, while very important, should be outside the law. And the reason for this is the law should be calibrated around what you might call the least common denominator of morality. Maybe don't be an aggressor, right? But sort of higher moral values and views. We don't all agree on these, and that's fine. And so that's why we think ethics and morality should be generally outside the law, but they're not unimportant. And so we still have things to say about them. And I think that we need to embrace these aspirational values if we're ever going to get to peace. And, peace is something in addition to freedom. And so that's what the Live and Let Live movement is about. It's very simple. We are not arguing about what the sort of philosophical underpinnings of why somebody should accept the Live and Let Live principle. Of course, there are many different reasons and justifications. Among them would be natural law considerations, or social contract considerations, or religious considerations, or economic considerations, or Ayn Rand's objectivism, or a whole host of other things. And we don't care why somebody accepts the principle, only that they accept the principle. So we don't argue about those types of things. We also don't argue about things like what's the proper size of government. We think the Live and Let Live principle should apply to every person and every group, no matter how big or small, including the government, including corporations. So as long as the government doesn't violate the Live and Let Live principle, we don't have, whatever it does is not our concern. How you define it is, if it doesn't violate the principle, we're certainly very happy with that. That's all we require. So we also don't argue about whether capitalism is better than socialism or vice versa. It's of no consequence to us. Whatever you prefer is fine, as long as you don't violate the rules. So what you might call voluntary capitalism or free market capitalism, well, that doesn't violate the rules, so people should be permitted to trade in the free market as they prefer. Of course, I'm talking about competent adults here. What you might call crony capitalism, where the government and business get together to advantage or disadvantage other companies. Okay, this involves coercion, and so for that reason, we would be against crony capitalism. Well, the same analysis applies to socialism. If people want to get together and voluntarily put their assets together and pay common bills out of that in any way they choose, that's their business. And the rule is not being violated. So voluntary socialism is absolutely compatible with the Live and Let Live movement. What you might call involuntary socialism, where people agree to do exactly that, and then drag people into it whether they agree or not, and say, you don't have any choice, you have to be part of this arrangement. Okay, well, for that reason, it violates the Live and Let Live rule, and that's why we're against it. And we don't have to get into economic analyses or anything like that. So we also don't get into little disputes about how we would implement the principle. There's many difficult questions, and you might call them gray areas or hard areas to resolve, where reasonable minds can disagree on how the principle should apply. We don't want to be at each other's throats on these types of issues. So we resolve this by simply saying the local communities should resolve these issues for themselves, and the local communities that resolve them in a way that people like will attract customers, if you will, or citizens to their community. And those communities that resolve these questions in a way people don't like, they'll lose customers and lose citizens, and eventually will very likely settle on the best rules, even in the difficult questions. And it's okay if different communities find differently on reasonable disagreements on issues. That's perfectly fine. We don't have any problem with that. So what we're really trying to do is get across this very important principle that we call the live and let live principle. Other groups sometimes refer to this as the non-aggression principle. John Stuart Mill referred to it as the harm principle. You can call it it goes by many different names. In Hawaii, you might call it the aloha spirit. You might call it the golden rule in some religious traditions, or, you're in charge of you, I'm in charge of me. Many different ways to explain the same concept. But the general idea is we're all equal human beings on the planet and equally entitled to both define and pursue our own happiness in any way we choose. We should be able to use our bodies, our property, our money, our time in any way we choose, so long as we don't interfere with, which in essence means violate the live and let live principle towards another person or their property. Very simple idea. It's not too simple, though. It works just fine. And in fact, I'm in the midst of writing a book right now explaining a little bit deeper dive into why we actually could have a functioning legal system in all areas that's calibrated and consistent with the live and let live principle. This isn't pie in the sky. This is something we can do. What does this look like? It looks like in criminal law, getting rid of victimless crimes, right? Because victimless crimes do not involve a violation of the principle. Therefore, they should be left alone. I mean, very important to make a distinction between whether something is legal and whether somebody agrees to it or thinks it's a good thing. I mean, somebody may not be violating the rule and cause us to conclude something ought to be legal, while we also conclude that what they're doing is maybe unhealthy or immoral or unwarranted or discouraged. In fact, we may even try to discourage them. Maybe it's not a smart thing to do, and all of that could be true, but this is the nature of living as a free person on the planet, right? The person who's engaging in the conduct is the one who gets to decide whether it's too risky or something like that. And we, of course, are free to try to persuade all we like, but using the law to impose our moral judgments or judgments about risk and happiness and those types of things on other people, this is never going to get us to a free and civilized society. In fact, this is at the root of all of our disagreements. If we could just simply adopt the live and let live principle and spread it around the world. And again, we don't need to convince everybody. Not everybody. We're not utopians. We don't think everybody is going to agree with this. But if we can get enough people, which might look like a third of the people or somewhere in there, then historically, that's been more than enough to make real change in the world. And that's exactly what we're planning. We're not doing this for the fun of it. We're not doing it because we just enjoy it or something like that. We're doing this because we want to change the world, and we need to change the world because we're facing a lot of very serious existential threats right now. I could go down a laundry list of problems that are coming, and I think those of us in the Live and Let Live movement are very worried that small numbers of unreasonable people are going to be able to create tremendous amounts of harm going forward. And so it's time for the reasonable people of the world to kind of get together, no matter where you live, and say, enough of the things that don't matter, like skin color or religious views or what language you speak or what nation you were born in or what holidays you celebrate or foods you eat, or who cares about it. I mean, that stuff is fun to celebrate. We should be embracing this stuff. This is what brings more richness to life. But to divide and be upset about these kinds of immutable characteristics is just complete insanity to me. So we need to unite behind an important principle that we call the live and let live principle, that's our tribe, right? The people, the reasonable people of the world who recognize live and let live, that's our tribe. Whatever color skin you have or wherever you live, we don't care about that. We care about the content of character, like Martin Luther King said. And so, like I said, we have monthly meetings for the leaders of our chapters. We have one coming up this weekend, and they're always so inspiring. It's really wonderful to see people around the world, a hugely diverse group, all united and flashing the Hawaiian shaka, all united around this live and let live principle, and very, very excited in a very simple and easy to understand kind of way to explain a very sophisticated and very moral theory of how to figure out what should be legal and what is in the moral realm. Because until we can get our brains around that, until people can say things like, I think this particular conduct is immoral and horrible and bad and terrible, and I would discourage anybody from engaging in it, but it should be legal because it doesn't interfere with anyone else's rights. It doesn't violate that principle. Until we can get people there, we're never going to really intellectually get them to buy into our theory. So those are our goals in the movement. And I think it's important to say, while our goals are very lofty, global peace is no small project, we're very serious about this. This is not an effort that we're putting together kind of last minute. This is why it doesn't kick off until 2023. We want it to be world class. It needs to really feel like a movement that very well could take over the world for the right reasons. And we're going to rely on the strength of the ideas to spread it around the world. And this is why we're trying to make it simple. And so if people are interested, they should just go to liveandletlive.org. And what they will see there is sort of a temporary website right now that will be completely redesigned and made into a world-class website before we launch the movement in March of 23. But there's enough information there right now for people to get a flavor, and they should join the movement. All they got to do is check a box that basically says, look, I agree with this principle. I agree with the values. Sign me up. And they check a box, give us their email. They're part of the movement. And then we send monthly updates, a newsletter, and just to let people know what's going on. And we'll let them know about the kickoff, the convention right now, and how people can get involved by starting chapters or donating money or donating some time to get involved in the movement and, be part of the solution rather than part of the problem.
Well, I think that you described it very well, the movement. I have some questions. Don't you think that it can be useful to put action in some specific issues? For example, the COVID mandates in their use in the United States. The movement will get to treat those issues individually.
Yes. In fact, we have some issues already on our FAQs, frequently asked questions, on the website. However, the book I am writing is really for the person who has gone through the website and says, I love the principle, I love the values, it all sounds great, but how does it apply to the gun issue, the abortion issue, the war issue, the drug war, or all taxes? And so my book will address each of these issues. I've endeavored to find the most controversial issues, most popular issues, most divisive issues, and given a very sort of short, clean, clear explanation of how this principle would apply. There are, like I said, there are some issues that are very difficult that we basically let the local community decide and see how it goes. But most of them aren't like that. Most of them are very easy to figure out. I mean, look, you can always think these things through in your head. I mean, you could ask me, Mark, how do you feel about issue X? And I might know nothing about issue X. But what I could still say about it is, look, I don't know anything about issue X, but here's what I can tell you. If somebody is violating the live and let live principle, then I'm against it. I think we should do everything in our power to stop that conduct immediately. If, on the other hand, nobody is violating the live and let live principle, well, then I may not like what's going on, and I may speak out against it, and I may try to convince people not to engage in the conduct, but I'll always come out the same way. If the principle is not being violated, then I will always say the conduct ought to be legal. It doesn't mean that there's a message being sent or that we think we got to be more sophisticated than this. Simply that something is legal isn't sending a message, and we should never accept this notion that because something is legal, the government is sending a message that it's okay to do. First of all, we don't need messages from government. Government is our agent, right? We send clear messages to government about what we want government to do as our agent. We don't need messages back from government about how to live our lives. That's not the proper role of government. But as a parent, I always taught my kids, just because something is legal doesn't mean I'm going to favor it or agree to allow you to do it. By the same token, just because something is illegal doesn't mean it's wrong. And I've said this in court on many occasions. In fact, every time I represent somebody on, say, for example, a marijuana-related crime, almost every time I stand up in court and say, Judge, my client did nothing wrong, nothing immoral, didn't hurt anybody, there's no victims, but it's illegal. It shouldn't be illegal, but it is. So we need to be more clear about right and wrong, in legal and illegal, and how these are qualitatively different concepts.
About that, the movement will always be a civil movement, or have you considered getting into politics?
Interesting that you asked me that question. We don't get too deep into telling people what to do. Excuse me. That said, I've been asked to run for United States Senate here in Arizona, and told that every libertarian in the state, if I run, will also run as a live and let live libertarian, which is interesting to me because I could imagine a world where people in different countries ran for different things as a live and let live whatever. And I think this will eventually attract some global attention, right? Wow, there's this sort of overarching notion, maybe even you would call it an informal political party, this live and let live idea. And as soon as we get that kind of attention on the movement, I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that if everybody knew exactly what it was we were saying, if they knew about our message and understood it, we would have far more than the third needed to get done what we need to get done. The problems, in my opinion, and I've been around the freedom crowd now for about 30 years, the problems with the freedom crowd, in my opinion, are that we've done a terrible job communicating the message. And the main reason for this is we don't lead with the principle. We lead with issues, right? So, for example, the much younger Marc Victor might have started a conversation with, hey, I think methamphetamine should be legal. What do you think about that? Or taxes are theft, or the government is a bunch of crooks, or something like that. And these aren't the best ways to start the conversations, because most people will hear a statement like that and tune out everything else you say. But second, unless they understand why we take these positions, which is understanding the principle, the one solitary principle at the root of every position that one in the freedom crowd might take, if they don't understand that principle, they haven't really understood anything about what this sort of freedom movement is. And so I just think and I include myself in this I just think we've done a terrible job explaining what we're about, not just because we don't lead with the principle, but because sometimes some of us don't present the position in a professional way. We have people who love to, by nature, our group is a group of people who think outside the box and sometimes act outside the box. And look, people should act however they want, so long as they don't violate the principle. But that doesn't mean every way someone acts would be equally persuasive to other people. So I think that there's a professional way to present ideas that we could do better on in the freedom movement. And so I think we could have less internal fighting about things that don't matter, like some of the things I said, where why someone might accept the principle. Man, we're in the freedom crowd, we're at each other's throats over whether this is a natural rights issue or a social contract issue or objectivist or whatever. Why do we care about this? I mean, that somebody accepts the principle for completely different reasons than I accept the principle is irrelevant to me. All I care about is that they accept the principle. So why, unless we're looking for ways to divide each other, which I don't think we should be doing, I think we should be looking for ways to unite good people, not divide them. And so a lot of times in our movement, we lead with the aspirational values. This is another real big problem in the freedom crowd. The freedom crowd pushes the legal calibration around the principle, and this is, of course, indispensable. But there's nothing ever said about ethics or morality, and this leaves sort of a gaping hole, I think, in our theory, right? I mean, there are many issues that come up where we resort to sort of an economic analysis and say, well, okay, this wouldn't, yes, like for example, if you've been around this movement any length of time, you've probably received a question, what about the horrible racist who wants to run a restaurant and exclude everybody that he doesn't like, and how do you feel about that? And of course, every libertarian will say, well, the right to trade includes the right not to trade, and so this person has every right to not serve whoever he doesn't want to serve. And then we go straight to an economic analysis. We say, well, that probably wouldn't happen for this reason and that reason. And I don't mean to belittle that. I agree with the economic analysis, but I think something more needs to be said. And so we in the Live and Let Live movement can say, look, this racist guy who runs his restaurant, he has every right to do so, but he's not part of our movement. Our movement is a movement about open-mindedness and tolerance, and we don't care about such things. So while we would protect the legal right of such racist person to do such racist things, so long as they're peaceful and don't violate the principle, this person isn't really part of our movement, because we're pushing a completely different narrative in our movement than the racist guy running the restaurant. So, this also, it has the benefit of securing some common moral ground, which I think is very important. Look, the people who in the United States, we might say on the left, the liberals, right, the socialist types, I think it would be a huge error to broad brush all these people as bad people or something. There are many, many good people on the left who consider themselves socialists. In fact, what I would say to such a person is, look, I take, for example, in the United States, a Bernie Sanders type, who I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yeah.
If I was talking to Bernie Sanders, I might say, Brother Bernie, you and I are in agreement on many, many things. We both think that some people are less fortunate than others, and we both agree we should help these people. We both think that we should do everything to get people access to health care and good education, and we agree with all of these things. There's only one small thing we disagree on. You think these are legal questions, and I think these are ethics questions. So where you want to import these into the law and force everybody through the law to fund your ethical conclusions, which I happen to agree with, I don't want to do that. I think that we should inspire people. This is why we talk about voluntary kindness. We don't want to violate the principle to impose our morality on everybody else, because not everybody agrees, right? What do we say? And just for a moment, I'll sort of pick on some of the religious Muslims and say, what do we say to the religious Muslim who says, I think Sharia law is a very important ethical consideration, and I want that in the law? Well, what I would say back to that person is, look, maybe this is a very nice morality. I don't pass judgment on it at the moment, but we've all agreed, for the sake of freedom and peace, to take out all of our morality, even the morality we agree with. So even though I think we should help those less fortunate, we don't put that into the law either. Now, the Bernie Sanders types have a more difficult problem here, because that's what they want to do. So they're basically reduced to saying, I'm sorry, our morality is better than your morality. Now, this ends up with this, right? Which is where we're at right now. Everybody sort of fighting each other endlessly to get their own particular moral views imported into the law. So I think this is not a practical way to achieve peace. The law should be to keep people from violating the live and let live principle, so we can all live in freedom and in peaceful with each other, at least. And then let's push morality. Let's not say it's unimportant. Let's not go hog wild and talk about every possible moral conclusion, but just some basic ideas that we call the aspirational values. I don't think we're going to lose many good people here talking about open-mindedness and tolerance and voluntary kindness. Chances are good, if they disagree with those aspirational values, they're not going to accept the principle either.
What do you think are the biggest problems or obstacles that the movement will face or faces today, or the libertarians in general?
Well, the live and let live movement and the libertarians have different obstacles. So the live and let live movement, I would say, our chief obstacle is simply just delivering the message. I'm 100% convinced that if we could deliver our message in a way that people could understand, and I think we've reformatted the message now in a way that if people hear the message, they can understand it pretty easily. We're going to succeed. I have no doubt in my mind. Maybe we don't get everybody. Okay. Probably about 90% of the people, if they understood what we were talking about, would actually agree. But we don't need anywhere near that. We need about a third. And so the biggest challenge to the live and let live movement is being able to deliver that message in a way people understand. The libertarian crowd has completely different issues because the message already is not in a format that people can understand. People don't know what the heck the non-aggression principle is. They say non-aggression. I believe in self-defense, so I'm not in favor of that. They don't really quite, it doesn't resonate the way live and let live resonates. I mean, you could ask probably 10 random people on the street, tell me how you respond to the phrase live and let live. You're going to get 10 positive responses, right? If you said, tell me what your reaction is to the non-aggression principle, I think you'd get, huh? Well, I don't know what that means. You would get the typical pushback with that. So I think that's a big problem. I think the libertarians are already saddled with oh yeah, I know what those guys are about already. And so I think that the opportunity to sort of start from scratch with a new movement probably has passed the libertarian crowd. And again, I consider myself a libertarian. I have no ill will towards the libertarian movement. I just think it's been around for quite some time now. It's been around since late 60s, early 70s. And it's made some progress, and it hasn't made enough progress, and is not likely, in my opinion, to make a lot more progress quickly enough. And this is only because the message has not been calibrated properly. And so, I wish them well, and I hope they can fix the messaging and get it across, because the live and let live principle at the end of the day is exactly the same as the non-aggression principle. It's the same principle, but it's just not been, because the libertarians don't lead with that principle. I would go so far as to say probably 50% of people who call themselves libertarians have never heard of the non-aggression principle, the one thing that defines what a libertarian is. So the message needs to be improved. The messaging needs to be improved. People don't know what a libertarian is. They don't know what the non-aggression principle is. But all around the world, they love the phrase live and let live. All around the world already. There are people with T-shirts and jackets and sayings and stickers already that say live and let live. It's easy to get people to put their hands up in the air, their fists up, and say live and let live. I love live and let live. This is starting the conversation with the wind at our back. And I think it's just, it positions us much better to communicate the very simple message, really. It's not that complex. The very simple message that we're trying to reach reasonable people. And, at the end of the day, and I know this sounds horrible, but I think it's true. All reasonable people agree with what we're saying. And I say this by definition, right? Because all we're saying is being an aggressor should always be illegal. Well, reasonable person is somebody who uses the tool of conversation, not the tool of aggression. So somebody who, by definition, uses aggression is unreasonable. And so I think I go so far as to say, by definition, all reasonable people agree with what we're saying. It's the definition of reasonableness.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a very simple principle. Just live and let live. Just out of curiosity, what is your personal take on the state, on the existence of the state? Do you think that is a necessary institution?
Well, a lot of this depends on how you define the state, right? You have to define exactly what you mean by the state. You have to define what you mean by the word government, and these aren't so easy to explain. But I might have a very simple take on this. I don't really care much about either of these things. What I do care about is that the law is calibrated around the principle, and then the law is fairly and reasonably enforced. I don't care so much about how the law is made. I don't care so much about who's enforcing the law. I mean, think for a moment, imagine, to take an extreme example, imagine aliens from a faraway planet travel to Earth and conquer the Earth. And on the day they conquer us, they say, hey, our weapons are much more superior than yours. We're now in charge. That's the bad news. But the good news is we very firmly believe in the live and let live principle. And we intend to impose that with an iron fist, but as reasonably as possible, and to enforce that as reasonably and fairly as possible. Everybody's going to get a fair trial and this and that, but nobody will ever be punished for anything unless they violate the live and let live principle. And you can do anything else you like with your body, your property, your money, your time. I wouldn't call that a conquering. I'd call that a liberation, and I'd be happy about that. So that's my sort of long-winded way of saying I don't really care who's enforcing, and nor do I care how we're arriving at the law. I think this complicates things unnecessarily. Do we need some overarching rules because people will come up with unreasonable or even bad faith interpretations of what the principle means? Sure. There are reasonable areas where people can disagree on things, like, for example, the age of consent. We say competent adults should do whatever they want, but we don't define competent adults. Maybe that's 18, maybe that's 17, 16, 15, I don't know, maybe even 14, but it's not 8. And so if a community decides that the proper age of consent should be 8, okay, well, I think we need to have some mechanism that says, sorry, that's not a reasonable construction of the rule. But if one community comes up with 18 and another community comes up with 16, those are reasonable constructions of the rule. They should be left alone. If you don't like that construction, move to a different community. And there can be many such things. So I don't want to get caught up with government or the state or such terms. They carry lots of baggage. I don't think it's accurate to say everything the state does violates the rule. What I would say more broadly is everything the state does that violates the rule, I think, should be abolished immediately. And everything the state does that's consistent with the rule, I have no problem with. Just like everything you do. I could say everything Jonathan does that's consistent with the principle he should be allowed to do, regardless of how I feel about it. And everything Jonathan does that violates the principle, we should stop him immediately. We should use all force reasonably necessary to stop Jonathan and the state and any group or corporation from violating the rule, period. We should do all of this with courts and with due process and not with violence. And we can figure out courts just fine. We can put smart judges up there who understand the principle just fine, and let courts do what they do and let lawyers do what they do. And we'll have common law, and this can easily be done. There's not just one way to do it. Different places may do it differently. That's fine. I don't care. What I know is when I come to Spain, I would like to know that whatever the law is there, it's at least consistent with a reasonable interpretation of the principle. that would be fine with me, even if it's not the exact interpretation I think ought to be the case, as long as it's a reasonable construction. And that way, I would know that unless I violated the rule, which we all have a pretty good idea on, I would be left alone. And that would be perfectly fine. I should also know that if I go to Spain and I violate the rule, I become an aggressor and I do something that should be against the law. That should be against the law everywhere. So I don't get bogged down in those things. I do cover it in quite a bit more detail in my book, which I'm writing right now, which hopefully will be done by the time we kick off. This is for the person who wants the deeper dive, the person who wants to read sort of through the parade of every possible issue. And I've gone out of my way to put the especially hard issues in there: animal rights, abortion, pandemics, like you talked about. I think there can be some very hard issues there. The gun issue, which doesn't appear to me to be so difficult, hard. These issues are all covered in my book. It's a very easy read, and it's not for philosophers, it's for the average person. And people can pre-order it right now from the Live and Let Live website if they like.
Yeah, you talk about the problem of the gun control, and here in Spain is an issue that we talk about it a lot, and it can be also related to what you were saying at the beginning about the substantial risk.
Yes.
What is your take in this? How can we solve the problem of shootings, for example?
I love that question. How do we deal with guns? Well, I deal with guns the same way I deal with everything else. Do whatever you want with your body property, and your property includes guns, money, and time, so long as it doesn't violate the rule. So obviously, using a gun to violate the rule is obviously should be illegal. This includes things like armed robbery and assaulting somebody with a firearm, these kinds of things. All of that should obviously be illegal. It's illegal now. It should remain that way. The rest of the analysis is just a function of things like, well, is a gun in your hand? Does that violate the rule? And it might. I can think of some circumstances where a gun simply in another person's hand violates the rule. I'll give you 3 examples. One, let's just say you have a long history of violating the rule, even with guns. Let's just say you've been convicted of 5 drive-by shootings. You've taken a gun and driven by a home or something in a car and aimed it out, and you've discharged it at a home, and you've been convicted 5 times. I think we can comfortably say a gun in your hand creates a substantial risk of harm to another person. I, of course, gave an extreme example because communities will differ here. Maybe 1 serious felony, violent felony, is enough. I think so. Maybe you have 20 misdemeanors of assault. Maybe we say, okay, a gun in your hand is a substantial risk. These are decisions the local communities should make. But I think what's important is that we always reason from the principle, right? So another category is where simply having a gun in your hand could violate the rule is if you're not competent, right? What if you're 4 years old, or what if you have a mental illness? A gun in your hand creates a substantial risk to other people. So I think it's perfectly fine and consistent with the Live and Let Live principle to say no guns for people who are convicted violent felons and no guns for people who are not competent. I think there's a last category that you might call technical competence, which means if you have no concept of which end the round comes out, you don't know how to safely secure the thing or use the thing. Okay, you're a risk because you can't safely handle or store the firearm. You don't know anything about it. Now, this risk, I think, increases as the weapons increase, right? And you might take what you might call a 22 handgun, a small little handgun. There might be some communities who say, look, we'll assume you're competent with that unless there's some reason to think you're not. Then there might be communities who say, no, you should probably have to take a little course as long as it's reasonable, right? Maybe you take a 1-day course and you learn how to fire the thing and how to secure it and what the law allows. I'm a big fan of being a responsible gun owner. That either of those would be reasonable to me. I think communities should decide. But then you get into much more serious weapons. Some of the weapons that I was involved with when I was in the United States Marine Corps, take, for example, automatic tripod-mounted 50 caliber machine guns. All right, I think you need some training on this. This has a 1 mile range and can kill a lot of people in a hurry. I don't know what the appropriate amount is. Maybe you should have to take a 2-month course, and so you can understand, and whatever it is. I don't know how long, but the community will decide what level of education, conducted by what type of a group, produced with what type of a certificate at the end as evidence of your training, makes us feel like you are not a substantial risk of violating the live and let live principle. So if the question is, how can we prevent bad people from doing bad things with guns, I don't know the answer to that. I think we have a lot of societal things we need to look at, like parenting and things of that nature, that I think could be very important there. But if the question is, what should our policies be about guns, then I think that what I just covered is the best policy, because, at the end of the day, we're not pushing utopia as much as I would love to get to utopia. There are bad people. There are mentally ill people. There are people who have bad days, who do bad things at the spur of the moment. People can do bad things with guns, knives, cars, rocks, their fists. And so we need to be realistic about what we can actually accomplish. I will note that there are studies done and books written. John Locke did More Guns, Less Crime, and where there's some pretty good evidence that, look, as you increase the numbers of responsible gun owners in a community, you get less crime and a safer place, not a less safe place. But to simply say, well, I don't like a gun, and therefore I'm going to deprive another person from having a gun because I don't like a gun. This could be said about anything. I don't like alcohol, and I want to deprive someone from, I don't like video games. I don't like, scary movies or whatever. This is not what a free society is about. You got to show me somebody is doing something, at least putting other people at a substantial risk of harm. If you can't show that, then they have every right to be left alone.
Yeah. Okay. Well, to start concluding the interview, I have 3 remaining questions I would like to ask you, personal questions, and we always ask them. What is your favorite movie, your favorite book, and your favorite song?
Favorite movie, favorite book, and favorite song?
Yeah.
Tough ones. There's a lot of movies I like. I think Pulp Fiction is the kind of crazy movie that I've always loved.
I have a poster here of Pulp Fiction.
Yeah, you can watch Pulp Fiction over and over again and never get tired of that one. So that's among my favorite movies. I like that one a lot. I'm a huge Trekkie, so almost anything in the Star Trek world is a big draw for me too. So okay, I cheat a little bit and tell you some more movies. Favorite, what was the other one?
Favorite song? Book and song.
Book. Book is tough too, because there's a lot of books that I really like. I guess everybody here at my law firm would give you the same answer for that question, which would be The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. I think that is the most important book for everybody to read. I think this will dramatically improve the lives of people who not only read it, but follow the advice, right? Because knowledge without applying any effort to it, without taking any action, is just useless. So knowledge is great, but you got to apply it to have any value. So I love The 7 Habits a lot. Just while I'm on this, a couple other topics. I love The Rational Optimist by Matt Ridley. I thought that was an excellent read. I finished David Friedman's book, The Machinery of Freedom. That's interesting. So there's a lot of, Murray Rothbard has some excellent books. For a New Liberty, I'm a big fan of. Walter Block's book, Defending the Undefendable, is always a fun read. So there's lots of books that I love. And the other was favorite song. Boy, this is tough as well, because I don't know that I have any one favorite song, but I might say anything by Led Zeppelin is going to make me happy. Also AC/DC. But on the other hand, I like music from many different genres as well. I find this among lots of different open-minded people. and this isn't true of everybody, but hell, open-minded people are generally pretty open-minded about all different types of music. So I'll listen to electronic music. I'll listen to, today we had disco music playing at our firm. I listen to reggae music, classical music, so all kinds of different music. So I'm a huge music fan. It'd be very, very difficult for me to pick any one sort of favorite song.
Well, you have a great taste. I also have here, in fact, a magazine about ACDC.
Bam! I love it. I can definitely say with certainty that is not my wife's favorite band, but I love AC/DC, and anything in the classic rock world is generally makes me pretty happy. But I listen to a lot of different kinds of music as well. The only things I don't listen to, not a huge fan of country western music. And although I like rap, sometimes I'm less than impressed by some of the messages, and so that gives me a bit of a turn off sometimes. But I gotta say, every once in a while, I can deal with some rap music as well. So I think music is more a function of the mood that is happening at the time. You wouldn't want AC/DC when you were winding down to go to bed, but in the gym when you're getting ready to do that heavy set, it's probably the best thing you can have on.
Yeah. Thank you for your time, for explaining the movement to us. I encourage everyone watching to join the movement, to go to the web. Thank you very much for being here with us.
Thanks for having me. And I should just say in conclusion, if anybody wants to get a hold of me, I'm very, very easy to get a hold of. You could just go to my law firm, attorneysforfreedom.com, and email me through that website. You can also get me directly. It's just Marc, M-A-R-C, at attorneysforfreedom.com, or through the Live and Let Live website. You can get me at Marc, M-A-R-C, at liveandletlive.org. I hope everybody checks out the Live and Let Live site. And also, I just put a call to action. We really need a chapter in Spain. We don't have one yet. Love to have somebody step up, and the people of Spain should definitely be represented by someone in the Live and Let Live crowd. And there may be people who are tuning into this podcast in other countries as well. So get involved, be part of the solution. I'm not suggesting you got to devote every minute of the rest of your life to this, but whatever slice of your life you've dedicated to trying to improve the world, I can think of no project more important than the Live and Let Live global peace movement project.
Yeah. So thank you here for being with us, and I hope many people join the movement.
Thanks for having me.